Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to day 2 of the Global Citizenship Education Conference, hosted by Swinburne Vietnam. Thank you for everybody who spoke and attended our sessions yesterday. I hope all of our audience are looking forward to today's sessions as well, and for some more engaging and insightful presentations. Once again, I would just briefly like to mention a few housekeeping rules. Firstly, if everybody could ensure that their mobile phones are kept on silent. Again, our Q&A sessions will be both in the auditorium and online, so just please be aware that we will also have people joining us online. And finally, again, if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask any of our staff or volunteers who have the lanyards. Now, to start off this morning's session, I would please like to welcome Professor Kim Wilkins, who's joining us online. Kim Wilkins is a recognized expert on creative practice, popular literature, and the publishing industry. She's the author of more than 30 full-length works of fiction, and her work is translated into more than 20 languages globally. Her scholarly research centers on creative communities such as writing groups and fan cultures. She's currently the Professor of Writing and Deputy Associate Dean of Haas Research at University of Queensland, Australia. Thanks very much for being with us today, Professor Kim. And just before we start, we have Dr. Marisha McAuliffe would just like to say a few words to you.
Good morning, Professor Kim.
Good morning, Dr. McAuliffe.
It's wonderful to have you here all the way from Queensland, and we appreciate that you're here today to share your thoughts and your ideas around creativity. And we're incredibly grateful that you're spending your Saturday morning sharing your knowledge with us and our audience here and online. So thank you.
You're very welcome.
Okay.
You good for me to go?
Yes.
You might have to mute at your end because I'm getting feedback.
Done.
Got it? Yes. Oh. I can still hear myself twice. I'll just get my slideshow up. That's better now. Thank you. Present. Well, good morning, everybody. As the lovely introductions pointed out, I am something of an expert in creative practice, and in particular, this concept of storytelling, which I wanted to speak to you about today. So there exists this kind of urgency nowadays that global citizens across all sectors and all disciplines should learn how to tell a story, should know how to tell a story. So, for example, the Harvard Business Review says, leaders who can create and share good stories have a powerful advantage over others, this idea of gaining an advantage through being able to communicate who you are, what you're about. GCED tells us that engineers would be better communications if their education included training in fiction. And Forbes asserts that the only way to get a promotion is to tell the story about the great things that are happening because of you. And indeed, at my own university, in a couple of years ago, when I was applying for a professor, I was told repeatedly, we need to tell our story in our application. So we all agree that telling stories is a 21st century skill that all global citizens should adopt. But this recommendation is rarely presented with any kind of detail about what a story is or what a narrative is, how one's structured, what the beating heart of a narrative might actually be. And people come to me and they say, oh, I've written up my career narrative, and it's not a narrative. It's a list of things that happened. And a story is not a list of things that happened. So what I'm going to do to open up is I'm going to give you a little creative writing lesson, and pay close attention, even if you never want to write a story, because it'll be useful for us thinking about the 2 uses of storytelling that I want to talk about to you today. So let's get thinking about the components of a story and how they come together. And interesting to me is that when people say you should write a story, you should do a narrative, etc., etc., they never ask a writer. So there are always writers around who are experts on these things. So I'm a writer and I'm going to give you the skinny on how to write a story. And it's really easy. I'm going to tell you about the 3 C's of story. And they are character, conflict, and context, right? So let's start with character. So this is about who the story belongs to, whose thoughts and feelings will have access to, what their stake in the story is, and importantly, how their backstory and their personality will influence the choices that they make and the reactions that they may have. A character is a human access point to a story. They experience it for us. They make it meaningful. The character provides what we might think of as the emotional ups and downs, the vertical movement of the story. The character must feel real to us, real enough that we can empathize, very important. The empathy piece is very important in storytelling, and relate, even if they are doing and feeling things that we would never do ourselves. Giving us that internal world and that ability to relate to other people who are not us is a powerful storytelling technique indeed. So the character makes the events concrete rather than abstract. Most of all, the character has motivation, and this is where it is incredibly useful if you are doing storytelling in some kind of research or business capacity, because often if you're telling, for example, a corporate narrative, you're not telling the story of an individual necessarily, you might be telling the story of a corporation. So like real people, characters act the way they do because of their personalities, their backstories, and their circumstances. So for example, a middle-class Australian with a steady job is going to make very different choices about how to behave than somebody living on less than $2 a day in India, or somebody living under an oppressive regime in an authoritarian state. So the character gives us the why of the story. And as Simon Sinek has shown, the why is always the hook, the thing that calls our audience and holds them there. So when narrating events, you should always start with a why, whether that's an individual event, maybe it's a research team. We decided to do this because, or whether it's a not-for-profit or a corporation or something, this corporation's values are X, and so we decided to act in this way. Why is one of the most important things of, in getting across a story. So you should always start with why. So the next C is conflict, and there is no story without conflict. I'll explain to you why. If a middle-class Australian with a steady job is walking down the street and stumbles over a suitcase that has $1 million in it, that's a story. If they just walk down the street and get to where they're going, that is not a story. That is a commute, probably. And again, connecting up conflict and character, think about how somebody on $2 a day might act if they get a briefcase full of money, or somebody living under an oppressive regime may feel if they get a suitcase full of money just randomly. So again, their conflict is shaped by the character and their background, their why. It's why it's so important to get that why into a story. So you can do all your best work creating a character with backstories and quirks and flaws, or coming up with a corporate narrative around your values and so on. But until you give them a problem, you don't have a story. So you need to give your character a problem, and then a story unfolds from there. A story describes the relationship between a character and the problem, or the conflict, as I'm calling it here. When a character has a problem, what do? They try to solve it. I mean, sometimes they ignore it. In real life, you ignore a problem and it sometimes goes away. In fiction, you ignore a problem and it gets worse. So always remember that too. So when a character has a problem, they try to solve it. And those steps that they take, the setbacks that they endure, the choices that they make, and the secondary consequences of that all go towards making up the plot or the horizontal movement of the story. So sometimes you hear this distinction between a plot-driven story and a character-driven story, but that's just nonsense. A story can't afford to lose track of either of those things. A story describes the relationship between a character and the problem that they have. So the character moves the plot along through their choices, which are a result of their backstory, their values, their motivation. And the plot moves the character along because things happen to the character and they're forced to make new choices or potentially change their mind about what they're doing. The trick in managing plot is always being able to imagine and calibrate multiple possible outcomes and choose the most plausible and the most interesting when you're writing fiction. That might mean that sometimes conflict has to come from the flanks, orthogonally, to throw the character into chaos. Importantly, the plot arises out of the character's interactions with events. That is, there is a chain of cause and effect. And this is what is so often missed in when people try to write corporate narratives or write their promotion story or whatever. They're missing the fact that it is not a series of isolated events. Everything exists in a chain of cause and effect. And you don't have to impose that if it's not there, because it is there. That is actually how we make our choices. We make choices based on what's gone before, on what might be coming later, and then we, might go forward from that choice or go backward from that choice because it was the wrong choice. So it's laying out that chain of cause and effect that gives a sense of plot, which is important to an engaging story. So when you're communicating your story, always include cause and effect. The last C is for context. And this encompasses what we would think of ordinarily as setting, but it's more than just the usual things that we would associate with setting, like time and place. Time and place aren't just things that happen in the background. They're things that are happening in the foreground and integrated with the character and the conflict. So it's not a backdrop against which characters and conflicts work themselves out in a kind of stagey way. Context is the history, the law, the rules, the logic, the culture. Fantasy writers, when you work with them, call this world building, because that's exactly what it is. It's creating a whole world inside which the story takes place. And importantly, every context, every environment in which people try to do things against the odds provides limitations and affordances for those people and the problems that they are trying to work out. And in the limitations and the affordances, we get an extra layer of interest that you can build into your story. The context then can change the complexion of everything. And I'd like to demonstrate with these two props. So I want to imagine for a moment a character. The characters are Mrs. Penn and Mr. Penn, and they are having a conflict, an ordinary garden variety conflict in Brisbane, where I am in the 21st century, right? So it goes something like this. Why haven't you taken out the rubbish? Why should I take out the rubbish? Because you're a man and it's a man's job. I thought you were a feminist. So there we are. Characters having a conflict in a context. What happens when we change that context? What happens if we take these characters out of the here and now and send them back to England before the Married Women's Property Act, maybe around the mid-19th century, and now they're not Mr. and Mrs. Penn, they are Lord Penn and Lady Penn. How does this interaction change? Why haven't you taken out the rubbish? Well, for a start, I think they'd probably have a butler to do that, right? So why haven't you instructed Jeeves to take out the rubbish? There's something still not working here. And I think you've probably already twigged to what it is. In the middle of the 19th century, women didn't talk to men like that. I think you would find, in fact, that the interaction would play out more like this. Lord Penn, what is it, woman? Oh, nothing. So you can see what I mean about context, about limitations and affordances. It changes everything. It changes the way that the characters act. It changes the kind of conflicts that are possible, and it changes the way that they unfold. And in your, research teams or in the corporations that you work in, you're aware of this. There are certain limitations and affordances. They often come up if you do a SWOT analysis, a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis. It's about what is possible and what is not possible in any given context. And that you build into your story. And if we think about, I said earlier, the horizontal movement of plot, the vertical movement of character, the context captures and contains those movements and gives it that 3D quality that we recognize in great stories. They feel real. So remember, when you're sketching out your story, to always sketch out the limitations and affordances of the environment that it takes place in to make it more interesting, to give it a richer picture of what kind of a story it is you're telling. There is one other element of story that's not one of the 3 C's that I'm going to mention briefly, but only because I'm a creative writer. I write books. And that is putting words on the page, which is part of my storytelling practice, of course. The choice of words, the choice of images, the choice of conventions that you use to invite the reader into your story is crucial. And I don't mean this has to be some platonic ideal of literary value. I don't expect you to be writing stories of literary value, whatever that means. I always think the good example is a romance reader seeing the words swashbuckling arrogance written on the page. And that is a very fine invitation indeed to issue to a romance reader. So again, you've got to think about how the words, the language, the imagery, and even the tropes that you employ when you're telling your story are fit for purpose. They've got to engage the reader in the way that you want them to bring them into the story. So that is a really important use of story, communicating events. And that is most often what people mean when they say, oh, we all need to be better storytellers, is we need to communicate events better. And we think this because we feel like we need everything to be interesting enough to circumvent the problem of a media environment with information people cannot possibly register it all. And so these storytelling techniques are very, very useful for communicating events. But I want to go deeper with this. I want to go further with this, and that's going to be what the rest of my paper is going to be about. Can story be reduced only to communication? Something that we do at the end of a piece of work to describe it. And the answer is, while it's very good and fit for purpose, in fact, storytelling has another use that is not often registered and which a lot of my research is now about. And that is not using story just to narrate what has already happened, but to think through what might happen. So UNESCO has now named futures literacy as an essential competency for 21st century global citizens. And in fact, as I'm about to argue, stories actually belong at the start and at the heart of ideation processes, and they are particularly useful in transdisciplinary research context. Stories are incredible tools for analysing and reimagining systems, and thus can be applied to complex problems alongside systems thinking as a holistic way of viewing all of the various aspects of a problem and how they interact. But as opposed to systems thinking, we can do this in a readily accessible set of shared terms that help us to communicate across disciplinary divides. Storytelling also introduces the element of play, of thinking beyond the probable to the possible and right out to the edge of the plausible. And so I'm going to turn to this aspect of storytelling now, then take you through a case study of the kind of work that I've been doing with storytelling in transdisciplinary problem environments. So let's talk a little bit about systems. And there's a definition up here of systems thinking. The grand challenges of the 21st century are often called wicked problems because they're high stakes. They have long time frames. They cannot be solved by a single research discipline, and they can seem existential, if not insurmountable. I like to give the example of the recent COVID-19 pandemic, or the recent example, the ongoing example of the COVID-19 pandemic, and how this shows us exactly what a wicked problem is, even if it's masquerading as a medical problem. In fact, the pandemic could in no way be narrowly defined as a medical problem. It encompassed social and behavioral sciences, communication and media, politics, international relations and the law, logistics and supply chains, macroeconomics, and a range of other disciplinary areas. And while we all now have a vaccine, which ostensibly solves the medical problem, I do understand the limitations of the vaccine, but it's ostensibly solved the medical problem. Those other disrupted facets of Western liberal democracy that we all took for granted before they were disrupted remain exposed, or at the very least still fresh in our memories. When we read The Stand or watched Contagion, the thing that those creators failed to realize about a pandemic was just how difficult it was going to be to get toilet paper. And things like travel. Recently, I was fortunate enough to travel overseas, and it's completely different to what it used to be like. Leaving Amsterdam, I arrived at the airport 4 hours before my flight and only just made it. And yet somehow we've all become used to queuing for ages and waiting and putting up with these long queues and these kind of checks and balances, because we understand we're still in pandemic thinking. And when I go to the supermarket and there isn't as much choice, again, I'm inured to that now because that's pandemic thinking. As corporations like our national carrier Qantas, who laid off everybody in the pandemic and are still trying to please shareholders rather than customers, we all are just accepting it. And this is all relevant to the pandemic, and yet people talk about it as though it's a medical problem. Once we fix COVID, everything else will fall back into place. In fact, so many problems, so many systemic problems in society have been exposed by the pandemic. If it didn't make me so depressed, I'd find it fascinating. I'd find it utterly, utterly fascinating. All right, so a holistic perspective that sees how the various parts of a complex problem interrelate, or systems thinking, is an effective way to bring global citizens from disparate disciplines, disparate backgrounds together for an integrated understanding of a wicked problem. Stories are precisely integrated accounts of problems, taking a 360-degree view of them. And so using stories in transdisciplinary research process can enrich that research in really many, many ways. Envisioning how things may play out, for example, brainstorming radical ideas about how environments may change, imagining how a range of people may be affected by the research, and offering researchers opportunities to build resilience into projects. One of my favorite storytelling games I play sometimes with executive teams is a pre-mortem, where the very thing that they are hoping to achieve, I get them to imagine that it's already failed. It's 5 years in the future, it's already failed. And then they have to sit there and come up in groups with reasons that things failed, and look at those systemic reasons, like such and such didn't do his work because professors are never actually cautioned when they don't do the right thing in a university environment. And doing it that way, rather than trying to imagine what might go wrong, but imagining it's already all gone wrong, and logically finding the reasons, is a brilliant way to surface problems that they might not have already thought of. And then they're able to go and build resilience and mitigation strategies into their systems. Now, I'm not the first person to draw stories and systems together, but as far as I know, I'm the first creative writer or expert storyteller to do so. And certainly, I'm one of the first researchers to argue that stories in themselves function as systems, complex systems. David Stroh is also interested in how storytelling might enrich systems thinking by forming bonds between people at various parts of the system to create a holistic vision. He writes, quote, "The best way to optimize the system is to improve the relationships among its parts," end quote. And he advocates for looking beyond the most easily visible problems in a system, or the events level, which I would call the conflict or the problems, and pay attention to, quote, underlying system structure, which I would translate as the context or the problem environment. So he doesn't mention people at all here, or at least he includes them as part of the context, rather than identifying them as differentiated actors with what you might think of as being interdependent with it, but all having their own independent backgrounds and so on. So he kind of misses a trick there. Conversely, Maggie Olof and 𝗘𝗕𝗚𝗖 write from the disciplinary perspective of design thinking, and design thinking does edge into what I'm doing here for sure. Where am I? Where's my notes? And they argue that stories can create a quote, collective narrative, end quote, as a diagnostic tool for complex problems. And it likens systems theory and design thinking, pointing out that the key difference is the former is used for analysis, which is why I am very keen on using systems thinking rather than design thinking, and the latter as used for human-centered solutions. And those of you who work with design thinking know that it is often used as a sort of a product generation thing, something to bring, you know, products to market, which is, I think, a bastardization of the original idea of systems thinking, which is human-centered design. But nonetheless, that's where we are. Whereas I'm much more interested in using storytelling as analysis and foresight and collaboration, which I think I'll probably get onto shortly. And this time in Olof and Latiyev's account, the setting is missing, the environment, the actual or speculative environment in which these negotiations take place is missing. And remember what I said before about language. Systems thinking is itself a discipline with a very specific language, and it's derived from engineering, as you probably know, which, as Peter Whitehead notes, does not necessarily lead to, quote, transparent expression, end quote. And I did follow up with the International Council on Systems Engineering, or INCOSE, and they'd made an attempt to standardize systems thinking, including proposing key engineering technology, such as maturity models, process dimensions, quality attributes, and information items. Now, if you put that against the language of storytelling, words like plot, character, and setting, you can see that these terms are far, far easier to grasp when you're working in an interdisciplinary team or a transdisciplinary team. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you an example of how thinking of a story as a system, or at least a boundary model for systems thinking, can supercharge systems thinking. So this example is from an article written by one of my brilliant collaborators in the Commonwealth Department of Defence here in Australia. And it shows how framing impacts of technology as existing in an ecosystem can, quote, extend understanding of how convergence of different technological elements could be leveraged to provide and augment capability, end quote. So what these authors do is they use critical systems practice to create technological ecosystems maps for case studies. And this is one of them, showing the multiple and contingent relationships between types of technology. For example, and this is, again, it's a defense context, but it shows all of these nodes of technology, communications, networks, information processing systems, drones, transportation platforms, and so on, and shows the interactions between them. And it's a lovely map. what it does is when it points out the connections between these things in a system, it then allows them to think about what the benefits and the risks are that they might not have already thought about in introducing technology. So it is a mode of technology foresight, which is something I'm very interested in. So if you just look at that for a second and get what I mean by this, this is an ecosystem, this is a systems thinking map of various defense technologies and what they do, okay? Ksenia and her team define technological ecosystems like this as, quote, the group of interlinked technological elements that work together with organizational and human elements as part of a capability enabling system. Even though they've said organizational and human elements, they haven't actually accounted for those elements in the system. And you can probably see where I'm going with this. Organizational elements are context and human elements are character. And what we see here on the screen is a series of plot points or a series of plot nodes. Somebody is employing an information processing system to provide data and alerts to drones, which provide security and supplies to advanced treatment modules. All right, so that's your classic cause and effect that I was talking about before of plot. What they've done with their technological ecosystem map is a version of plot. What they haven't accounted for is the character and the context. Setting and character aren't accounted for explicitly in this map, but you could see where they could be to provide an even richer version of this technological ecosystem and enrich the learnings about the benefits and the risks, or the foresight about the benefits and the risks. Rather than just showing how technologies work together in terms of operational capability, I would argue that we could understand better what the risks and benefits are if we include the people at play in the system and the system itself, or the environment that the system takes place in. So at every one of these nodes, there are different benefits and risks that can be envisioned. Let's take, for example, a communications network. That means something quite different in different nation states with different governmental systems, and will have quite different impacts in the hands of red teams or so-called grey actors. So much more could be pulled out of this ecosystem map if we integrate storytelling elements into systems thinking, if we recognize that stories are another way that systems can be used, not just to analyze, but to imagine. And by imagining, we can mitigate against some of the worst disasters, but probably not all of them, because you never know what you don't know. All right, so I'm going to just finish up. I hope I'm not going over time, not really. I'm going to just finish up now with a case study, the kind of work I've been doing with these ideas, showing how storytelling can not only communicate narratives of what's happened, but also generate ideas of what could happen. And this is an example from a group of researchers and stakeholders in the field of agricultural science who wanted me to run an ideation workshop to think through possible directions of research that would help the sector achieve net zero by 2050. The brief was that I had to encourage the people to brainstorm ideas that were right out on the edge of possibility. And then they handed me a room full of people who were mostly scientists and hadn't used their imagination since middle school. So that was interesting. So this is how I use storytelling to get them working. Let me read the blurb so you don't have to read it while I talk. Obviously, this is meant to look like a Netflix splash page. Alex Jones has spent the last 25 years on a round trip to the Mars colony. Now she's back on Earth and she's inherited the farm she grew up on. But a lot has changed on the farm since she used to help her father. Small town politics is not what it used to be. And the boy next door grew up to be a distraction she doesn't need. Just as she's learning to deal with it all, the story of her mother's death 10 years earlier takes a mysterious and sinister turn. Alex needs to get her feet back on the ground, and fast. So as you can see, I went straight for the shared language of streaming television as an invitation. where a huge proportion of people get their stories so they understand how stories play out in a series on Netflix. And I marked it firmly as a sci-fi series, which people are again familiar with from streaming television, but also because that genre is associated with future thinking. So they are dumped straight into the idea that they need to think about the future. So that does a lot of the work in helping them to catch up in terms of using their imagination, though you'll notice I threw romance and crime in there too for good measure, and you'll get to see the fun people had with that. So this is a challenge that asks them to imagine a new context so they can brainstorm ideas well beyond the probable. The challenge I set them was to pretend in groups that they were script consultants on the series with all of their knowledge about agriculture and so on. And they had to come up with futuristic possibilities for the net zero farm of 2050 for these elements of the plot to play out against. And they captured their ideas. Hang on a second, I'll stop sharing so I can quickly change windows. They captured their ideas on this very cool Padlet, which I will get up for you to look at. Which I absolutely love. I loved what they did with it. This group has gone on to form a funding bid for a cooperative research centre, and so I call this a big success of mine. But you can see it went from everything from animal proteins, precision pollination, farm AI, to the mother is not dead. She just went to Mars and will return in episode 76. They were very interested in the dead mother, and I loved how they brought the genre of crime together with the genre of sci-fi to talk about people using up a lifetime's quota of CO2 outputs. There's one here about people becoming photosynthetic, methane collection to power farm tech. There were going to be methane drones everywhere, which I was calling flying fart robots. It was really interesting. So as I said, they have gone on to form a bid for a cooperative research centre, but really the success for me was on the day watching them become a cohort, watching them laugh and play and challenge themselves and compare themselves to others and saying, oh, yours is better than mine, and then pushing themselves to be more imaginative, taking some really out there ideas, or sometimes just bringing them back from the brink of implausibility, having revelations, and of course, solving a murder. So to wrap up, I'm a humanities scholar, and I believe that the humanities haven't always been good at arguing for our value in a mission-based research environment, like the kind of research environment we need to solve the global problems of the 21st century. The fact that storytelling, a classic humanities skill, seems only to be valued after the event, to communicate something that's gone before in order to maybe create goodwill for what might come next, might be our fault as humanists for not showing how thinking like a storyteller can improve the quantity and quality of innovative ideas across all kinds of teams. As global citizens, we do need to be better storytellers, not just to narrate what we have done, but also so we can imagine a better future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim. That was excellent. I wonder, do we have any questions in the auditorium that anybody would like to ask?
There were really fascinating insights, Kim, in connecting the dots between your discipline and agriculture. It's a seemingly unrelated field until you connect those dots between the two. Do you think that then, in the framework of UNESCO's definition of global citizenship education, that perhaps we could consider the idea of storytelling or futures thinking as being included in the framework?
My opinion is that it should absolutely be included in the framework. I think there's more and more of a realization that if we don't imagine the future that we want, someone else is going to imagine it for us. And up until now, and continuing now, it's increasingly been a very small section of the international community, mostly a lot of white American guys. So at the moment, you know, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, etc., they have way too much power, and their version of the future is the version of the future that we're going to be living in. But they have not necessarily got the public interest or the global interest in mind. Then these people are not Bill Gates, who wants to give away all of his money and, you know, cure polio or whatever it is he's doing at the moment. Good for him, even though he too is a white American guy. So I think that if we can empower people across the globe from all different backgrounds to imagine a future with hope. At the moment, there's far too much despair about the future out there. If we can get people to imagine a future with hope, we can inspire them to go forward and be better global citizens. People who are global citizens who need to, I mean, the word globe is in there. You know, we are the guardians of that globe, of the earth. And we need to very quickly get our shit together to solve a range of complex problems that will secure the future, basically, of our species. So yes, absolutely. Futures thinking is so crucial. You know, I hope that my research can contribute to that, even in some small way.
I have Karen Nelson here from RMIT Vietnam, and she is the head of teaching and learning there. I'm going to pass the microphone across to her because I noticed her taking quite a few notes, and she's been quite fascinated with your presentation. So let me pass you across to her.
Hi, Kim. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I found the first part particularly interesting because I work with academics on teaching award promotions, and the storytelling aspect's always the most challenging for people. But I had another question in terms of your, I guess, thinking globally. I wonder if the lens that we're looking through here isn't perhaps a Western lens, because storytelling is actually quite rich in other cultures. I guess I've worked in various different international contexts, and I wondered if storytelling isn't perhaps embedded into future thinkings in other countries or in other cultures.
Now, that's an excellent question, an excellent point that you've made. And in fact, my team and I sometimes look at each other and go, hey, we're really similar. Where are the other types of narrative? I mean, I've stopped talking about the Western narrative shape, for example. When I do this kind of work, I still write in a Western narrative shape because it really is quite limited to Western and often Anglophone culture. Yeah, and I feel particularly in Australia, the real opportunity here is in Indigenous storytelling. And so our team is now reaching out to work with Indigenous storytellers to enrich our model. I am not sure what people are doing in other cultures, I'm afraid. I know that the kind of work I do, for example, working with defence, is common, you know, France, United States, United Kingdom, they're all doing this kind of thing. Defence obviously needs to be right on top of this because defence needs foresight, and it needs imaginative leaders in a, you know, incredibly hierarchized system. But I don't know enough about what is happening in other cultures to be able to answer that fully.
Thanks very much. And then the other thought I was thinking around was, we keep talking about disruption of higher education, and I'm thinking that this storytelling approach could be really interesting for that discussion. So thank you very much.
No problem.
I did have a question from Dr. Chadwick about the curriculum.
Oh yes, how does one introduce this into the curriculum?
Well, that is a very, very good question, Dr. Chadwick, because of course we don't run courses at UQ on futures thinking. We potentially should, I think. I like to enrich my creative writing classroom with this, but most of the intervention I'm making at the moment is actually with research teams and with executive level academics. And, you know, to go back to what Karen said, I don't think I'm giving it away too much, but there is a Deans of Arts, Social Sciences and Humanities conference on in Brisbane at the end of the year, and we are planning a pre-mortem, a prospective foresight session called Humanities and Social Sciences Died. Well, it's not called that. It's called The Future of Humanities and Social Sciences, but when they get in the room, I'll say it died. That's exactly what we're using it for, to think about how we can mitigate against the constant attacks on the humanities and social sciences in the Australian university system, which hopefully won't be quite so bad now that we've had a change of government. Is anybody talking? Because I can't hear anything. You've all gone. Oh, I thought I'd stunned you all into silence.
Can you hear me now, Kim?
I can hear you now.
Okay. All right, Kim, I know that you were recently at CERN, and you're obviously a storyteller. What does CERN have to do with storytelling? I don't understand. And can you just briefly explain what CERN is to the audience here?
Yeah, CERN is the European Centre for Nuclear Research. You would know it as the home of the Large Hadron Collider, which is, so it's a fundamental hardcore physics lab, and it is particularly interested in particle physics. They're trying to just to find the smallest thing in the world. That's my lay understanding of it. They have within their organisation a place, a unit called the CERN Ideas Square. They have recognised, a bit like defence, which I mentioned earlier, that you can exclude no ideas if you want an advantage in your research, in your science. So what they do is they regularly work with artists, musicians, and in my case, storytellers, to think about possible uses for their knowledge and their technology. So I was invited to CERN as part of a team of particle physicists and science fiction writers. And we spent 3 days working out 5-year, 10-year, and 50-year scenarios for the future of detection and representation, or imaging. When I first signed up and they said detection and imaging, I really wasn't clear what that was, but now I very much know what it is. It's finding particles and representing them. But we were asked to think about applications in terms of sustainability, peace technology, shared consciousness, real sci-fi things. So it was great. And so the findings of that get fed back into the high-level strategy of CERN, and may, someday in the future, become something. The really interesting thing was when we put up our 5-year scenario, they went, yeah, we can already do that. And I was like, are you serious? That's insane. It was really very cool. So it was a great honour, and I hope to be able to go back in a couple of years when they do it again.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Kim. That was a really, really engaging and amazing presentation. I think some of the questions we had were great as well, and your answers were amazing. So yeah, once again, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking your time out on a Saturday morning. So thank you very much, Kim. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. So that takes us to the end of the penultimate session. We will have one more session, which is going to be a panel that will be starting at about 10 a.m. We have a mixture of people who will be in person on stage, and we also have some people who will be joining us online. I will present them to you shortly, but if we can take a 5 or so minute break, there are some refreshments just out there, and if we could be back just before 10 a.m. so we can start nice and prompt. Thank you.
Can you hear me, Abby? But you can't see me.
We wrote a pivotal paper that's really shifted the landscape in engineering education in Australia.
Recording in progress.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to introduce to our final session of the Global Citizen Education Conference. The last session we will be having is going to feature a panel of guests, including Professor 𝗘𝗕𝗚𝗖, the president of Fenneca University, as our panel's chair. Joining Professor 𝗘𝗚𝗖 is our organising committee. We would like to introduce Professor Deanna Grant-Smith from QUT, Professor Sean Nyquist, Head of Global Citizenship Education Centre at Swinburne Vietnam, Dr. Abby Winter from Queensland University of Technology, Dr. Marisha McAuliffe, Head of Student HQ at Swinburne Vietnam, Dr. Chris Willems from the Australian Performing Arts Conservatory, and Ms. Madison Nguyen, Global Engagement Lead Student Services at Swinburne Vietnam. The subject of today's panel will be reflecting on global citizenship in education, and each speaker will be given 5 minutes to express their thoughts. Thank you very much, and look forward to hearing you.
Okay, that's great to speak to all of you. So I am Phạm Thành Huy from the University of Fenneca in Vietnam. When we speak about the boundary for global citizen, then the story now is touched to everybody. I just remind that just before the COVID pandemic 3 years ago, my office was knocked by one of the students, but she's not come from Vietnam. She actually come from Thailand, and just come to a university in Vietnam and asked for the application for the master program. So it means that the world is now more open. And in the Southeast Asia country, there's a policy that we will take the language of other country at the secondary school in preparation for the university. And that is the true need for the next generation student. But from Vietnam education system, in order to integrate the training to provide students with skill for the global activity, we think it needs time because the training program it fixed in a certain block, and we need to add extra curriculum, extra courses to the curriculum, and it really takes time, and especially for the trainer. We at this moment we lack a trainer. For example, at my university, we intend to introduce into our training program several topics that will enhance the student capacity to go to join to the global world. But then when we look at the lecturer, then it's difficult. So I think one of the important topics is that we need to train our trainer, our lecturer for that topic. Secondly, we know that the COVID pandemic had a huge impact on our education system, and I must say that it is really difficult. At this moment, we had the test result for the last academic year, and the outcome is not good. The average point of students go down. So it means that we are now facing with many new problems, and how to keep the quality of our training. The students had been spent almost 2 years at home with very less activity. The interaction between teacher and student seemed lost, and that really affect good and bad impact on the outcome. So how we will help them to recover in the next 2 years until the graduation. That is another point I would like to raise here. And lastly, I know that the international education is now become more and more open. And the university, for example, in Vietnam, we know that many universities from abroad, from Australia, come to Vietnam. And the students now have more choice. They can easier to choose an appropriate university, a training program for them. And that it now the need that we need to provide more information to students to see what is the difference, what is the clarify the need for the student in the future, not now, but for the next 5 years, what is the really need skill or knowledge for students. Thank you.
Do you want to pass it across to Abby Winter, Dr. Winter?
Yes, please.
Thank you. From my perspective, I'm coming at it from a slightly different viewpoint probably than the rest of the panel, because my work at my university has been as a professional or administrative staff member. So most of my engagement with the global citizenship education that we do was around crunching the numbers of how many students are going places, how many are coming back. As a part of that, I got to see some of the delightful stories from those students who are coming back with their minds and understandings and abilities expanded in an enormous way. So that is where my interest and understanding for global citizenship initially started. I'm now in a different role, 3 jobs later, working with a lot of academics and researchers from many different parts of the globe. And so in everything I do, I'm seeing the usefulness and the advantages of not only having our people go out to places, but also enriching what we do by having people from other places come and join our work and our conversations.
Thank you, Abby.
Am I- Well, thank you, Abby. So, for me, what I think about when I think about global citizenship education is I think about being able to agree to disagree. Because every single one of us come from a different background, we have different experience, and we sometimes have different ways of thinking. And sometimes we clash on that. And I'm drawing from personal experience, so I studied abroad. I spent quite a certain amount of years in New York where I did my high school and my undergrad. And I do believe that I had to adapt to the new culture that New York was a lot. Because with my upbringing, I was a very traditional Vietnamese girl, you know. I was this dainty little girl, kind of perfect, always got good grades and all of that. But then I got introduced to a new society with a new group of people. I had to adapt to that a lot. And other people obviously thought different from me. So I had to be able to accept their thoughts. I don't need to agree with them, but I have to be able to accept them. And with that, I believe that global citizenship education is all about being able to understand others, but not certainly always agree with others. Chris, do you want to share with us your thoughts next?
Firstly, I noted down some broad themes from the conference from yesterday, and there are quite a lot of them, and they're all very pertinent. And I won't just list them out, but there were some prominent ones like creativity and communication were very prominent. In fact, I think it was Mr. Samuel Ang who talked about 98% of business leaders thought that communication was the most important skill, and I certainly wouldn't disagree with that. And I think what conferences like this demonstrate is, especially after the pandemic, that it's so important to have these kind of conversations, even if one agrees to disagree. That's really the point in having the conversation, rather than sort of demanding that we all have the same view, because we clearly don't. But not having the same view is not a barrier to working together. It's not a barrier to teamwork, which is another theme that came yesterday. And things like problem solving and adaptability are very so important to apply to tolerate and apply in our work together as educators, whatever the context, and whatever the country that we happen to be in. So. And the problems that we've had to solve over the last couple of years have been pretty immense for all of us, without exception. And we're still here, and we're still breathing, we're still talking to each other, which is a great thing. And I have to thank Dr. Mauricio McCullough for bringing this conference to fruition, because it's such an important conversation to have. For everybody on the planet, and increasingly so because the world seems so fractured at the moment. I like to say that art is more important than ever at the moment, but talking to each other is equally important. It's a very important thing to keep the conversations happening, and so I'm immensely grateful to have been invited to be part of this. And I acknowledge the high value of all of the contributions to this conference. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I'm indeed very, very grateful that we have all of you here abroad. And in fact, most of the people that have been, in this conference have been either my direct friends or connections and within my network. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. I particularly resonated with 𝗘𝗕𝗚𝗖's Dobson's speech when she was talking about cultures and identity and leadership. And let me relate back to you two instances where it became very apparent to me where leadership was something that you lived and breathed and not just a title in your name. I was in India as a Pro-Vice-Chancellor of an higher ed institution, and it was in West Bengal. And we had, in West Bengal, there's quite a few culture clashes and between Hindus and Muslims, and gathering or riots and mobs as a part of normal everyday culture. And I, of course, had been in leadership positions for years, and I had headed up a number of institutes and all the rest of it. However, one day we came, I had to, as the Pro-Vice-Chancellor, to put into place implement the Indian government's enact their rule that there was a 75% attendance and it must be done, otherwise they wouldn't be permitted to take their final exams. Needless to say, that was definitely not a very popular policy. And I arrived up to work one day, and having been in, having gone through a number of riots, like travelling through, whatever, in my 3.5 years in India, it was quite a normal thing. And I could sense that there was a gathering started, and anyway, so it quickly escalated into a riot. And unfortunately for me, my fellow leaders were hidden in their offices and under their desks, terrified, like I was. But I realised that there was no other way to placate the crowd other than go out and face it. That, ladies and gentlemen, was one of the most difficult things of my life, to face a mob of rioting students, 400, coming at me. And I realised that day that it was about, it didn't matter whether or not I had the position or didn't have the position, I had to show leadership. And I was the only person in the leadership team that actually went out there and faced that mob. Now, leadership is about doing the difficult things when you don't want to do it. Leadership is about making the call when you don't want to do it. And that's about what we need to instill in our students, that it's not about rising up the chain of command and getting your manager or director in your role. It's about having to do it. Second example is also when, in India, when COVID hit, one of my best friends across there is Mr. Andrew Ford. He was the Consul General for West Bengal and the surrounding 11 states. And it's through him that I actually met James Dean, who spoke yesterday. Now, Andrew is an incredible leader. Here he was as Consul General. He was, like me, one of the last Australians, sort of Australian-born Australians, to leave India in late June 2020. 2020? Yeah, 2020. And we had been locked down for 67 days. He was across one side of town and I was in the other. While he was locked down and there was rationing, no food could come in or anything, we had to ration. This man, Andrew, displayed such resilience, such strength and such leadership. And during that 67 days, his apartment block was on fire and he had to leave his apartment block because of the danger of the apartment block falling down. So then he went to his apartment, he went to a hotel to live. So the important thing is that it doesn't matter what is happening to you. It doesn't matter what is happening in your life, and it doesn't matter what your role is and what your title is. It's about demonstrating leadership, resilience, adaptability, and showing up when it's the most difficult. And I think that that's one of the most important things that I can resonate with 𝗘𝗕𝗚𝗖 about. So I'm going to pass across to Deanna, we're fascinated to hear your views.
Hi, so I work for the Queensland University of Technology within the Faculty of Business and Law. And one of the subjects that I teach is a very large subject where we have about 1,000 students per semester across every single one of the business disciplines. So we have a very diverse student cohort, which is made even more diverse by the fact that the business school is incredibly fortunate in that we have a lot of international students as well. And so I was listening to what Madison had said about how much she had learned about being an international student herself. And I actually think that her modesty prevents her from recognizing that while there is a learning opportunity for the student who goes to the international environment, they are actually providing a gift to the environment that they enter into. So I personally see the exchanges that my students have with the international experiences. I call it internationalization at home, where they're actually having this wonderful, unique opportunity to engage with different cultures, different ways of thinking, different ways of approaching problems and the world, and that they can benefit just as much as the student who is having that international experience. And the reason I raise this is that when I think of what global citizenship education is about, it's really about achieving three things. The first of these is about connection. So everybody's been speaking about the fact that it's about finding ways to communicate and connect with people, to begin to understand different ways of thinking and being, and also to, I guess, in that process, understand yourself a little more. The second thing I think that global citizenship education offers to us is to teach students or assist them on their journey to develop respect for that diversity, because it is one thing to recognize it and to be able to, effectively communicate with other people, but it's an entirely different thing to have a respect for other people. And I think that really shapes not just our interactions with other people, but the way that we move within the world ourselves. And finally, I think the third thing that global citizenship education allows us to do is really focus on sustainability in all of its forms. So it helps us to recognize, I guess, our own privilege, the kinds of things that we can enjoy within our own culture or circumstances that might not be the same elsewhere, and to see how we can improve situation for everybody, whether it's environmental, economic, or social. And part of that, when we think of this idea of internationalization at home, is often we will see students in Australia that will go on study tours to another country that might be a low or middle income country, and they go there to help others. It's almost a form of voluntourism, where they can feel good about themselves because they're assisting people who require their help, so to speak. And I actually think that undermines many of the things that global citizenship education is setting out to achieve, because you're not respecting other people, you're not recognizing the value, the benefit, the contribution that they make to their own and to our broader society. And I think that it also diminishes the way that students from these wealthier countries could actually turn their eyes to the problems that are within their own countries that they could actually help to address. So whether it's with lower socioeconomic communities or with our own Indigenous communities, our refugee communities, there are ways that we can help the world by looking in our own backyard. We don't necessarily have to go elsewhere to do that. And by having our international students, the thing that I enjoy in my classes is the way that they can open the eyes of my own students to the things that they don't see about our own culture. And for me, that's the gift that global citizenship education offers to both the travelling student and the student who is at home.
Thank you, Deanna. That was wonderful, and I can resonate with so many of those points that you mentioned there. I think I'll draw on our last keynote speaker's words about telling stories. in the previous session, she spoke so closely about how important it is to tell a story. So I'll start with a little story. I grew up in a small country town, rural town, farming town, and I thought I was just going to stay in that little town and probably be a farmer or work in the local area. I didn't think I'd be sitting here today in Hanoi speaking with so many wonderful people amidst so many wonderful presenters. But during my life, I've been also a teacher for over 25 years. I've been a student for all my life. I'm still learning. But one of my first teaching positions was in a town of 450 people. 450 people, not students. A small country town in the outback of Australia. And I like to connect and engage with students. I like to get to understand my students. I like to get to know them and learn myself. So as I said, I'm always learning. And I realised that being global doesn't mean going to different countries. It's about mindset. It's about understanding people. It's about connecting with them. And I thought, I need to give these students some experiences. I need to get them out there. I need to show them the world. I need to show them what being global is. And this is over 20 years ago. And so I found a way to get a bus license. We'll discuss that later. But I got a bus license. I found a bus. A local organisation gave me a bus. And I grabbed these students, I put them on the bus, and we drove 13 hours to the Gold Coast in Australia. Mm-hmm. And what really got me was we stopped at the beach first because they had never seen most of them had never seen the beach. I stopped at the beach, and some of the students ran down to the water, other students were running on the sand, and one of the students just stood there and looked at the ocean. And I said, "Is everything okay?" He said, "I just never believed this is what the ocean would look like. This is not," he said, "the sounds, the smell, everything. I just never believed this is what the ocean would be, or that I'd ever get the opportunity to do this." And to me, that was a real eye-opener, and it got me thinking about what is my role as an educator? What are we teaching in schools? What are we teaching in universities? Do we have to stick to a rigid curriculum? Can we disrupt education? Can we change what we do in education? Can we look at it through a different lens? What are the experiences that are important? Where are these children that I taught 20 years ago? What are they doing now? And I have connected with some of them, or they've connected with me, and they've got some amazing stories, and they've gone so many places, and they still talk about these experiences. And I think we need to reflect on what our role is as educators, as people in global citizenship education, in universities, in colleges, whatever our role is here, whether we're working in World Bank or any of the organisations that we've had speak with us. What is our role and what is global citizenship, and how do we disrupt that education? How do we transform the lives of young people, or not just young people, transform lives in general?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing such a beautiful story. I think the world needs now become more and more open, and to train the student for the more global citizenship education. It now that the key word is creating the environment where people accept and respect the differences in culture, and where we create the environment where we can connect the people, where they can speak together, and we cannot have one model. I think it will depend on the location, on the country where the university were located, and through all, I think the language is important. The student need first, and even the connection between the student and the teacher, educator, that they have to speak the same language. They should understand each other and accept the differences. And as the educator, as a lecturer, we are ourselves have to prepare as well. Because when students come from different culture, from different country, they have different way of thinking, and even with the staff member, now we had different college from faculty from different country, and they had different way of thinking, and that is the moment that we had even at the university we need to change our university system as well as our educational program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. That brings us to the end of our panel discussion. I think that was some fascinating insights from everybody involved. Thank you very much for everybody who joined us online. Do we have any questions in the auditorium that anybody would like to ask to any of our speakers?
Yes.
Sure, we have a question here.
So, hello everyone to all the audience who happen to be here or are viewing this session online. My name is 𝗘𝗕𝗚𝗖 and I'm a future Swinburne student. And I'm so fascinated by the sessions and all of your story and experience in terms of global citizenship educations. But I also have a few questions I would like you to answer and to somehow clarify my curiosity. Right, so the first question is global citizenship for everyone, and why we are talking about the scale of higher educations? Because it is something that I'm thinking in my mind right now. It's like, what is the value of global citizenship educations to the people who don't have the privilege to go to higher educations or don't have the privilege to travel abroad, and they don't associate themselves with the Western cultures? Because somehow we were talking about the Western culture lens, like a professor from RMIT was mentioned before. And yeah, so should it be applied also to the lower educations, not just the higher one? Thank you.
Could I pose that question to Chris, please?
Ideally, it should, yes, be open to everyone. We live in a world that is, the reality of our world is that it's business driven and money driven and all those kinds of things. But we have to find ways. We have to find ways of accommodating everyone that wants to have that kind of education. Or any kind of education, really. And I was fascinated by Sean's beautiful story about the small boy at the ocean. It was just like it's so revealing, and it also reflects something that I wrote down from I think it was Dr. Hahn, about doing stuff, about experiencing things. And I think if I quoted it correctly, when you travel, the road becomes more clear. And I think having the experience of education is what reveals what education is for you, for the individual, and for societies. And I think it's so important that we do make ourselves as educators available to as broad a range of people as possible.
Thank you very much. That was a great question, and thank you very much for your answer, Chris. Do we have any other questions? Oh, sorry.
Could I respond to that question also?
Of course.
Excellent. I just wanted to say, if we wait until we're in higher education, tertiary education, it's too late. We actually have to have global citizenship education right from the beginning. If you wait until you're at university, there's too much else that you have to learn. This is something that we learn throughout our lives, right from the beginning of it. And it's not something that we stop when we leave higher education. It's something that we should be continuing to learn and practice as professionals, as people within the world. So for me, education doesn't necessarily mean within a formal educational institution. It's just the process, as other people have said, of learning more generally, and that this should be right from the beginning to the end of our lives.
I think the when we get why we need to when we speak it at the higher education level, because that is at the moment you prepare yourself for the future. You decide what to do in the future, where to go, and and when you know you decide the direction where you go, you need to prepare for it. So and at the university level, where you will learn the skill, the expertise, and knowledge in a certain field. And for now, the world need become small, and when you think about the job, you not only think about a certain country, but you also can look at other country, and that is the moment you need to learn about the different culture that you would fit when you grow up, when you apply for job. So that is why at the university, one of the important take that the educator think about it, how to prepare for students, the skill that it needed for them when they apply for job, when they graduate from the university.
Thank you very much. Now, I believe that is going to bring us to the end of our panel section. That was an incredibly engaging speech by everybody, some amazing stories, and I hope everyone took away a lot from that. So I just want to say thank you very much for everybody who has joined us. Thank you very much, Professor Deanna, Dr. Christian, and Dr. Abby. Thank you for everybody on our stage as well, Dr. Sean, Madison, Professor Hui, and Dr. Marisha. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining. We're probably going to take a short break now, just to get some more refreshments, and then we will go into the closing ceremony, and we have a couple of speakers who will just be rounding up the conference. So thank you very much, everybody.
Hello, hello.
So, good morning once again, ladies and gentlemen. This is now going to bring us to the end of the Global Citizenship Education Conference. Now, to close, we have a number of speakers who are going to provide us with their thoughts and feelings and how they thought that the last 2 days has gone. Now, first of all, we have a video from Mark Tattersall, the Chargé d'Affaires for the Australian Embassy. Mark's kindly recorded the video for us, so we'll play that in a moment. But just as an introduction, Mark is the Senior Career Officer with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. He was most recently Assistant Secretary, Aid Management and Performance. He was lead author of Australia's 2020 Development Policy, Partnerships for Recovery, and from 2018 to 2019, coordinated Australia's humanitarian response efforts in Indo-Pacific. Mark holds a master's degree in international social development from the University of New South Wales and arts and commerce degrees with first-class honours in history from the University of Sydney.
Thank you and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mark Tattersall, Chargé d'Affaires at the Australian Embassy here in Hanoi. I'm very sorry and I'm unable to join you in person today. It's nonetheless my pleasure to be here virtually for the closing ceremony of this important conference, Exploring the Boundaries of Global Citizenship, organised by Swinburne Vietnam. I'd like to thank Swinburne for the invitation and for their work in organising the conference. I'd also like to acknowledge all the contributors and participants, experts, leaders and practitioners, educators, youth, policymakers and professionals in the education sector. I'm delighted to see from the program the diversity of Vietnamese, Australian and international organisations represented at the conference. This shows the high levels of interest in the topic of global citizenship education, and I'm particularly happy to see so many representatives of Australian and Vietnamese universities. Ladies and gentlemen, the relationship between Australia and Vietnam has never been stronger. We are strategic partners who share a common outlook on the region, complementary economies and deep people-to-people links. We celebrate 50 years of bilateral relations in 2023 and are in discussions about further elevating our partnership to mark that milestone. In that context, it's striking to note how significant educational linkages have been in the partnership between Australia and Vietnam. Australia offered its first scholarship to a Vietnamese student to study in Australia in 1974. That's only 1 year after we emerged from conflict and first recognised each other as nations. From that humble beginning, we now have built an alumni network of over 70,000 Vietnamese students who have studied in Australia. Vietnam is our fourth largest source of international students. I meet human examples of this network all the time. Australian alumni exist at all levels of Vietnamese government and society. Invariably, they are positively disposed to Australia. Invariably, the experience of studying overseas, of opening their eyes to new ideas, new experiences, new cultures and perspectives has played a seminal role in their personal and professional development. Indeed, in the very way in which they understand and interact with the world around us. And of course, the exchange is not just one way. Amongst the many varied learnings of COVID in Australia has been the incredible richness and vibrancy that international students bring to Australian campuses, cities and towns. They were sorely missed at all levels of society throughout the pandemic, and that's why they've been so warmly welcomed on return. And then there are the linkages between educational institutions in Australia and Vietnam. Relationships, research and academic partnerships that grow in depth and sophistication every day. Australian universities are amongst the largest and most ambitious Australian investors in Vietnam. These linkages contribute substantially to the growing depth of the economic and commercial relationship between our countries, as well as seeding the ideas and relationships that foster growth in other sectors. I say this because I believe that this story of the role of education in the Australia-Vietnam relationship is highly relevant to what you have been discussing over the course of this conference. That's because it shows the power of education, and particularly globally minded education, to enrich lives, to spur ideas, innovation and growth, and to foster understanding, cooperation, partnership, stability and indeed peace amongst nations. Now, more than ever, it is important that societies, and especially the educational institutions that shape those societies, recognise the importance of global citizenship and in doing so invest in developing individuals who will face challenging issues with a mindset that is fundamentally open to new ideas and approaches, because only then will we be able to face the complex challenges of the future: climate change, environmental degradation, geostrategic competition, inequality, technological disruption, artificial intelligence, automation amongst them. All of these will fundamentally require global cooperation if they are to be overcome. I trust your discussions over the past 2 days have assisted to inspire and enhance your understanding of the potential of global citizenship education. I hope also that these discussions have assisted you to reflect on the practical implications for policy, curricula, teaching and learning. And of course, I hope that through these discussions you've established relationships and connections that will allow you to continue to explore and promote the ideas you've encountered through your participation here. I hope you bring back with you valuable new perspectives and are now able to put these to work in your institutions and your communities. Thank you once again for your participation. I wish you all the best and all good health and success.
Thank you very much, Mark. Now, we have a second video from Rebecca Hall. Rebecca is Victoria's Commissioner to Southeast Asia at the Victorian Government Trade and Investment. She commenced this role in September 2020 and represents Victoria's trade and investment interests across Southeast Asia. She manages the Victorian Government Trade and Investment offices located in Jakarta, Kuala Lumpur, Singapore and Ho Chi Minh City. Rebecca holds a bachelor's degree in International Business Relations, a Master's of International Relations and a graduate certificate in higher education. Is a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, member of the Singapore Institute of Directors, and has served on a number of boards and not-for-profits over the past 15 years. In 2021, Rebecca was appointed as the first Global Ambassador for the Climate Action Network for International Education.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm sorry I can't be there in Ho Chi Minh City, but I'm delighted to record this message on the eve of the conference and share some of my reflections on global citizenship and global engagement in higher education. My name is Rebecca Hall and I'm the Victorian Government Commissioner to Southeast Asia. I'm coming to you today from our office in Singapore, but in the region we also have teams in Vietnam, right there in Ho Chi Minh City, in Malaysia and in Singapore. And our job is to engage on behalf of the Victorian Government and our businesses, including our education institutions, in partnering globally. As a state, education is one of our most significant employers, and our relationships with universities are drivers of cultural, economic, and social value in our state. And this has only been reaffirmed and reconfirmed during and post-COVID. Educating professionally skilled, ethically thinking and cultural competent graduates is a shared goal of government, universities and employers. However, what is not so clear is how we achieve this. And of course, the answer is there is no one solution. We know there's a combination of the cultural context, the environmental, the education environment, and personal aspiration of our learners. When I first started my career in international education back in 1995, it was a choice for our universities and education providers to be internationally engaged. I would posit that for universities now, global engagement is clearly not a choice. It's a requirement and it's a foundation to ongoing success and impact. Let me just share 3 ideas and areas that I think will be absolutely critical to the future of international engagement and education in Southeast Asia. The first is continued growth in transnational, online and alternative education programs of learning that are aligned to the needs of the local learner. And when I say local, I actually mean global, because we know that all learners, no matter what the aspiration is, are operating in a changing, dynamic global environment. We're very proud to see a number of Victorian universities highly active in these delivery modes, with campuses, programs and partnerships that way exceed many other states and indeed countries in their engagement. And this is very prevalent in Southeast Asia, particularly in Vietnam, here in Singapore, Malaysia, and growing in Indonesia. So I think the second area that will be critical is around alignment between industry and our higher education institutions to address critical skill shortages and preempt skills needs. And I know that's quite a high level statement and one that is a constant challenge, but I think the key opportunity in a post-COVID context is to revisit our global approaches to talent attraction and development, and to really aspire to have freer and fairer migration settings that reward and attract the best talent to the right area at the right time. The final area, and perhaps you would expect me to say this as someone who works in a government role, but it has never been more important for government leadership in this space. I'm proud to work for a government that's invested heavily in education, making commitments all the way from early learning to postgraduate studies. Our work in the region is less on the policy side, but having good, strong policy settings domestically enables us to partner more freely and openly with other educational institutions, with governments, and with industry partners globally. We're proud during COVID to have been able to innovate in this space, creating study hubs in Ho Chi Minh City, in Kuala Lumpur, and in Shanghai. And these hubs are helping us form new ways of engaging with learners, new and alternate ways to connect through education technology, and to continue to build our network of partners. These hubs are an asset not just for government, but for our educational institutions. And I would love to welcome any of you in the audience who are in Ho Chi Minh City or have some time to stop by and visit our study hub. As I was preparing for this conference, I actually went back and had a look at one of the last symposiums that I was involved in around the topic of global citizenship. And that was actually way back in 2014. It was the Global Citizenship Symposium, delivered in partnership by Study Melbourne, the Victorian Government, the Australian Government, and the International Education Association of Australia. There are a range of papers and discussion starters that were produced as part of that symposium. I'd like to play for you now the highlights reel from that symposium. And as you're watching, please think about what's changed. Are we further ahead or further behind? Are there new players, actors, and drivers in this space? And what could all of this mean for your work and our shared future of international education and global citizenship?
There is no escaping that we live in a highly globalized world. Some people talk about the world which is highly compressed. Others talk about the world in which geography is dead.
For today's generation, their world is devoid of postcodes. They no longer connect or necessarily identify just with their local community. They are global citizens for whom political, economic, and social borders are no longer barriers.
Global engagement is clearly not a choice anymore, it's a need, it's a requirement, and young people are very differently able to orient themselves towards the global depending on their resources.
The reason for having the event, I think, really is to put under the blowtorch some of the rhetoric and look at some of the practices around these issues.
Educating professionally skilled, ethically thinking and culturally competent graduates is a shared goal of government, universities and employer groups. However, What is not so clear is how we actually achieve this.
And clearly it's been very difficult to translate some of these rather abstract notions around global citizenship, cosmopolitanism and so on into effective, deliverable curricula.
Global citizenship is a term just like student experience. It's a term that is always defined by government agencies, defined by universities, but never by the student. And you'll find that the main issue about that is that students don't actually take ownership of what they are being exposed to.
It actually starts at home. How do we behave every day? Are we good citizens before we try to be good global citizens?
To date, I don't think students are necessarily challenged or taken out of their comfort zone in learning routinely. Global citizenship is often seen as an extracurricular activity and is not engaged, or it's not integrated into learning.
One of the points in the papers is really about how do we embed some of this stuff in our curriculum, in our universities, in our culture. And I'm really wondering, do we need to really kick this along? One of the interesting things, I'm not just saying this from a social experiment point of view, is to not embed it, but to make it available and then see what sort of demand we can really drive.
My question is about the shift that we're seeing towards online learning now. How do we get this global citizenship and global competencies embedded when the students do not necessarily ever have to come onto campus?
If global citizenship is an elite preoccupation without deep grounding in popular society, we can expect to see a recurrence of resistance to it.
As global competition becomes more intense, global citizenship takes on a more prominent role in differentiating the very good from the very best.
Clearly young people are deeply aware of big global issues like environmental degradation. They're very concerned about war, about poverty, and they feel the responsibility on them to be world savers or world changers. And this has sometimes been described as selfie humanitarianism. So what we get is not a kind of joining up with political collectivist activities or efforts to create some kind of global civil society, but trying to really create change in ways that also perhaps build your CV.
We need to understand soft skills and hard skills and how we bring them together in that global citizen to ensure that we can drive the change that we are looking for.
With a worldwide surplus of graduates competing for employment, academics results alone will not suffice. Employers are no longer restricting their focus to local, but to global. So employers will not only expect, they will demand something extra. That's something which makes students stand alone as globally networked, global ambassadors who are also global citizens.
Thank you very much for your video, Rebecca. Now, our next speaker with closing remarks is Ms. 𝗘𝗕𝗚𝗖. Ms. Bui is a researcher at Vietnam's National Institute of Educational Sciences. Her work focuses on educational policies, curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment, emphasizing the fields of transferable skills and inclusive education. She's been a key researcher of various national and international projects related to education for sustainable development, such as research on improving systems on education. The Vietnam Global Citizenship Project, collaborative action research on the role of schools in achieving SDGs in Asia. Vietnam education sector analysis and plan funded by Global Partnerships for Education. Open Digital Library for Vietnamese children funded by UNICEF, and impact on gender and inclusive pedagogies on student participation and learning achievements.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me today. And thank you all for very interesting and engaging presentation that give me many ideas of promoting global citizen education that I can take away from this conference. And on the behalf of Vietnam National Institute of Educational Science under Ministry of Educational education and training. I would like to give some some ideas about the global citizenship in Vietnam. So it is obviously that global citizenship education is very important, and it helps learners become responsible and active global citizen. And actually, Vietnam, we have a great effort to develop like a students' competency, and we will promote global citizenship education in Vietnam, because we have promulgated many decisions to facilitate this aspect of education. So, for example, like in 2018, we have created a new national curriculum that we focused. We moving from content-based learning curriculum to competency-based curriculum. And by the way, we can have students have like many active educational environment. And in new curriculum, we also created a new subject called like experience activity, like have students have more opportunities to experience in many aspects of life. So what our aim is live what we learn and learn what we live. And most recently, Vietnam Ministry of Education training have conducted a national project on Vietnamese like called Global Citizenship Education in Vietnam. And in this project, we did a survey asking thousands of teachers and students and also school leaders about the global citizenship. We also propose a framework of global citizenship education in Vietnam. So we pointed out a lot of indicators that we adapt from international framework to more suitable with Vietnamese context. And we hope by this way, this one can help promote this and more effective in the Vietnamese context. And in this educational global citizenship framework, we use a holistic and approach, like whole school approach. We hope that we can bring global citizenship education to each school in Vietnam, such as we propose about create a school environment that are safe and interact and inclusive school in Vietnam. And also we guide a school to redesigning a school curriculum, and so school plan, and we also like have them understand about the three main pillars of teaching and learning, such as curriculum and pedagogy and also assessment. So we don't make the global citizenship is a separated subject, but integrated in our curriculum. So we have did some pilots in school about integrating in each lesson that can develop global citizenship competencies for students. So it was very successful, and this framework was approved by Ministry of Education and Training. And we beside the achievement of Vietnam education, we also have like face a lot of challenges relating to this one, such as assessment, because sometimes we understand that assessment in Vietnam still like content based. So it's very hard to change teachers' perspective to change a way of teaching. So sometimes they just focus on the score of students more than their skills. So with many efforts from ministry, we try to send many dispatch, also conduct a lot of project to help students and to help teachers and school change their mind. And also like we also have like promulgated many dispatch to change assessment. And we think that best way we can help teacher and also like school achieve their and help student a lot in to be the global citizens. And our institute, like Vietnam National Institute, Institute of Educational Sciences, we call for collaboration from many institutions and also individuals to help students, and we work together to make our global citizenship education to bring global citizenship education to every school. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for your speech. Now, our penultimate speaker will be joining us online as well. This is 𝗘𝗕𝗚𝗖, the Director of Study Queensland, Trade and Investment Queensland, where she leads a team that supports Queensland's international education and training sector. She comes from a background in tertiary education and government, most recently as the Senior Manager of Entrepreneurship at the University of Queensland, where she played a strong role in the development of the first UQ entrepreneurship strategy. Prior to joining UQ, 𝗘𝗕𝗚𝗖 was the Director of Innovation Policy and Programmes for the Queensland Government, where she developed and implemented Queensland's government's innovation policy and developed a wide range of statewide innovation programmes. Welcome, 𝗘𝗕𝗚𝗖.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you all today. And before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country on the land from which I join you and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So this has been a great and really interesting conference to talk through how we prepare students to be active global citizens, recognising the increasingly rapid and complex changes happening in our world. This can be a daunting time for our students and for ourselves, but also one full of opportunity. As discussed in previous sessions, our future students are showing strong signs of being values-driven. They're looking to build discipline knowledge and they're looking to contribute positively to the world in which they live. In Australia, we have definitely seen the rise in importance of a wide range of skills, competencies and mindset that build global citizenship. The Foundation for Young Australians has been progressively conducting research that has found that students today will experience a very different work life from previous generations, with the need to transition between jobs and careers. And in the lead up to the pandemic, successive projects found that increasingly, employers were looking for a broad range of what can be called those 21st century skills, including entrepreneurial skills and mindset. This combination of critical thinking, problem solving, and innovation skills, alongside those traits of creativity, resilience, and adaptability. These skills underpin an ability for students to transition successfully as jobs and industries change over time. At the global level, the World Economic Forum has concurred with an identification of top skills for 2025, recognising these skills as well as the emotional intelligence and mindset of resilience and, importantly, of tolerance. Just recently, our National Science Agency, the CSIRO, has released the latest megatrends impacting our work and lives over coming decades. This reflects also the extent of the acceleration of the disruption on how we live, work and play globally, as we look forward to the increasing needs and adaptability requirements of ourselves and our future students, and how we can help support and prepare for this. In Queensland, and as I am Study Queensland, part of Trade and Investment Queensland, a statutory body of the Queensland Government, we have a very strong support for our international students that are attracted to our state. Prior to COVID, approximately 130,000 students from right around the world were attracted to study various study options across Queensland, with about 30% of those students attracted to our regions, who all provide their own competitive strengths in terms of fields of study, geographic advantages, and connection to local business and local community. Queensland has the most diverse international student cohorts in Australia, and this means that we have a fabulous and vibrant cohort of students with knowledge of diverse cultures, languages, strong global competencies, extensive global networks. So when our domestic and our international students study and learn and contribute to community together, they're connected locally and globally around the world, and they learn from each other, and they learn to understand each other. How are we preparing students to continue to increase their global citizenship skills and abilities in what can be a fast and will be increasingly a fast changing world? So in Queensland, it has started at the school level, and I noted the comments on the panel recently. Just recently, our Queensland Department of Education held a statewide conference focusing on leading for global futures. The conference provided a way for all in the schooling sector to share approaches to create authentic, inquisitive, and collaborative opportunities for students to actively participate in their communities, locally, globally, digitally, and personally. Definitely of interest and being embedded through schools right across our state. And a wonderful forum at that conference to share learnings and experiences across different schools and different regions of Queensland. Across our vocational education and training and higher education institutions, there is a strong and increasing focus on employability skills for students. Opportunities to build on and dovetail with discipline and technical knowledge attained through education with broader competencies. This can be achieved through a range of connection to community, to organisations, to business and industry locally, for example, through internships, work integrated learning, volunteering, as well as global exchanges, mobility programs, and an increasing investment in a lot of our higher education institutes in entrepreneurship programs and activities. A number of statewide bodies, such as Study Queensland, also offer support for students. We run a Launch You program, which is open to all students in Queensland, that connects students from across different organisations and institutions into teams to work on a project with a Queensland exporting business on a specific market opportunity. The program has received very strong feedback from both students and participating businesses alike for the value it generates for all concerned. So in conclusion, it is inevitable that we will continue to live in times of rapid change and disruption. If well prepared, it provides significant opportunities for students to contribute strongly as world citizens, both locally and globally. But this support needs to be a collaborative effort between education and training providers, all level of government, communities, and industries. And forums for sharing knowledge and building collaborative partnerships, such as this conference, provide a great mechanism for us to continue to work on this together. I'd like to provide many thanks to Dr. Marisha McAuliffe, the team at Swinburne Vietnam for organising this insightful conference, and to all the other speakers and contributors who've made it such a success. I'm very pleased to have been part of this event. Thank you very much and all the best.
Thank you very much, Kylie. That was a great speech. Thank you. Now, our final remarks today, and we're finally closing the ceremony. will be from Professor Huy Pham. He was on stage with us earlier on. Professor Huy is the president of Phenica University in Hanoi. He's the vice chairman of Vietnam Material Research Society, member of the board of the National Foundation for Science and Technology, and sits on the board of the state program of New Materials and Technology in Vietnam. He received his PhD from the University of Amsterdam in 2001. Professor Huy is a reputable scientist, both domestically and internationally, who has experience in teaching, scientific research, application technology development, and in organizing the construction of new units. He has registered 6 patents on utility solutions and implemented many technological transfers into production. Please welcome to the stage, Professor Huy.
Excellency, distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of the 3rd International Conference on Exploring Boundary of Global Citizenship, and it is my task to provide some closing remarks. It is a blue text because we shall be closing the door on lively and stimulating debates as well as bidding farewell to friends and associates. However, it is also a privilege and an honor to be enchanted with such an undertaking at a gathering of such eminent people from different parts of the world: Australia, the US, EU, Canada, Singapore, New Zealand, and Vietnam. In the field of government, industry, academic, and the media, namely UNESCO, UN Women, World Bank, Australian Embassy, New Zealand Embassy, 𝗘𝗕𝗚𝗖 Education, QED, BRICHAM, EuropeCham, and from many universities and research centers around the world. As we had very rich discussion during the past 2 days, I am inspired by the national experiences and innovative practice on the global citizenship education implementation set by so many countries. The issue we had discussed, such as updated definition of global citizen, the importance of global citizenship education, the existing issue on the training activity to tackle and provide the best skills for students, are really important feature for successful achieving the Sustainable Development Goal by the year 2030. Though I understand that the global dimension of citizenship is not necessarily always explicitly articulated with understanding of citizenship in principle of responsible engagement in common education objective. This is the reason of tremendous commitment and effort that I wish to commend today. When the notation of global citizenship was first introduced, it was contested due to its perceived dissociation from local need and reality. Today, this perception is, however, changing thanks to the renewed interest in an emancipatory approach to citizenship education that aims to prepare the learner to become engaged and responsible contributor to the society and broader human community. Indeed, a threat to peace and sustainable development are shaped by dynamic being played out at the local, regional, and global level. All at once, we can no longer ignore the interdependence of local and the global by extension of the critical importance of global citizenship education as a means to help learners of all ages to assume this responsibility. Global citizenship education fosters a critical understanding of the interconnection between the local and the global in view of equipping learners with knowledge, skill, value, and attitude they need to contribute to building a more peaceful, sustainable future. Looking at the world through this lens allows us to see that while we are a diverse human community, we share a common density on this planet. We also share fundamental values that unite us. Many societies have traditional core concepts that resonate with three core notations of global citizenship education, namely solidarity, respect for diversity, and a sense of humanity. For my part, I would like to highlight some key messages from the last 2 days. Knowing there are others, you will convey yourself very well. So the 5 key messages on my side. The first, it is necessary to be a good citizen in order to be a good global citizen. The second, global citizenship will paramount because the world will becoming a single village, and the problem we are facing today will be on national boundary, and we have the core responsibility to be responsible for global citizens, to watch out for each other, and to be sensitive to how our actions affect one another, no matter where we live. The third, there's no single approach to implementing global citizenship education. Although experience suggests that certain factors contribute to its successful delivery, such as long-term and sustainable, covering the local, national, and global dimension, development and sustained in collaboration with local community, with feedback from monitoring and valuable process, etc. Fourth, important integrating global citizenship education in higher education curriculum to enhance student understanding of global citizenship education. And the last, stress that we need respect for human rights, gender equality, inclusiveness, social justice, and acceptance of diversity, and that these were the qualities that must be promoted and practiced to ensure a better world and future for all. As you can see, the topic of the conference is very much in line with the presentation you had today and yesterday, making this exchange particularly timely. We therefore look forward to see you soon again in the next time to continue this conversation. On this last note, I would like to thank the keynote speaker for the very valuable information imparted to us on through the research and presentation. And this will help us better direct our intervention and guidance on global citizenship education. A big word of thanks to Dr. Marisa McAuliffe, Director of Student Support Headquarters at Swinburne University, Vietnam, and her team for organizing such a wonderful international conference. Xin cảm ơn, xin tạm biệt và hẹn gặp lại. Thank you, goodbye, and see you soon.
Thank you very much, Professor 𝗘𝗚𝗖. That was fantastic, and thank you very much for being with us. So this brings us to the end of the Global Citizen Education Conference. I just wanted to say thank you so much for, number one, all of our speakers, for providing such insightful information and providing such good education for all of our participants. Thank you for all of the people who have been attending in person in the auditoriums. Thank you to everybody who's been attending online. We've already seen the numbers of people attending, and it looks like we've had a lot of people through various different streams. But really appreciate, particularly to the Australian Embassy, for providing all of the contact for the speakers that we've had, and of course our Swinburne Vietnam's connection to Australia is as strong as ever after events like this. So, once again, I hope you all will be able to join us in the future. I also just wanted to say thank you to all the staff and volunteers. If it wasn't for all of the volunteers, particularly the Swinburne students, these events can't happen. So to continue doing these types of things, we need everybody's help and everyone coming together. So excellent, and thank you very much. Now, finally, we will have a performance from one of our very talented Swinburne students. So please, would you welcome to the stage Zhang for 𝗘𝗕𝗚𝗖.
Em có nghe
Thank you very much, everybody. Could we just have a big round of applause for everybody who's just taken part in this as well, because we need to do that. Thank you very much, and well done. See you at the next one.